The plateau lay beneath a haze that never quite lifted, a shimmer of heat and dust where horizons blurred into memory. The convoy moved slowly, tires whispering over mica-flecked gravel, instruments ticking with the patience of routine. For days there had been nothing but wind and the endless rhythm of sunlight. Then, one evening, the light began to change. The sun fell low behind a ridge of rose-colored dunes, and across that dim horizon, something broke the perfection of sand. Shapes, human in height and posture, standing half-buried as though the desert had paused mid-breath. At first they seemed like tricks of glare. The team marked coordinates, logged the anomaly, and made camp. But as night drew its first breath, the air thickened with that peculiar stillness found only where time has stopped paying attention. The lead geologist stepped away from the lights. From the crest, he could see the figures more clearly. Rows of them, aligned along an invisible axis, shoulders angled toward the dying sun. Wind moved through the valley with the rhythm of tide water, carrying a tone too low to be heard, only felt. When he returned, he wrote a single line in his logbook before sleep. The desert remembers more than it shows. The words didn't feel like his own. That night, even the wind seemed to hesitate, caught between exhale and silence. At dawn, light slid across the dunes like a hand revealing a hidden relief. The men gathered wordlessly. The shadows shortened, and one by one the figures emerged. Soldiers, or what remained of them, each stood in formation along the slope, half buried beneath centuries of drift. Their armor gleamed faintly, bronze fused to stone, edges softened by time, but unmistakably human. The faces, though eroded, carried something almost alive, a calm that bordered on sorrow. No sculptor could have shaped expressions so weary. The archaeologist brushed dust from a cheek. The stone beneath was smooth as skin, the grain following muscle lines, not chisel marks. Under magnification, the pores looked organic. The sand around the feet of each statue had hardened into crusted circles, faintly magnetic. Drones flew overhead. From above, the spacing was perfect. Curved rows turning inward toward a central point, as if surrounding an unseen command. No quarry marks, no debris, no origin. Just presence. As the team recorded data, a pulse rose through the ground. Subsonic, measured, like breathing behind a wall. It made the hair on their arms stand upright. By noon, the wind stopped completely. The statue's eyes reflected sunlight into the camp, thin, sharp beams that danced across every instrument. It felt less like discovery and more like being found. The desert cooled fast after sundown, the heat retreating into the ground like an animal seeking sleep. Lanterns trembled in the breeze. The night seemed ordinary until the compasses began to drift, not sharply, but slowly, deliberately, as though the north itself had moved. Instruments vibrated faintly on their tables. The air changed pitch. It wasn't sound, it was pressure, a hum pressing against the chest like breath too deep to be human. The geologist stepped beyond the circle of light. The moon made glass of the valley, every footprint, every ripple in the sand, frozen mid-motion. The statues stood where they had before, yet something about their posture felt altered. A subtle lean, a shift in alignment, no one could measure but everyone could feel. He strained to listen. The wind moved differently here. It didn't pass, it turned, circling, drawn toward the figures. Somewhere within the stone came the faintest vibration, air moving through mouths sealed centuries ago. It wasn't random. It rose, held, then faded, separated by silences so precise they felt intentional. By the time the sound stopped, the geologist's hands were shaking. He wrote again in his notebook, his handwriting uneven. The wind doesn't speak, it remembers. And when he looked back at the valley, the statues seemed closer than before. The excavation began beneath a sun that refused to move, its heat pressing down like a weight that made the world slower, heavier. The men worked in silence, sweat turning the sand dark beneath their knees. Every stroke of the brush revealed not randomness, but rhythm. Boots turned to stone, sabers frozen mid-arc, shields imprinted with patterns that belonged to no dynasty anyone recognized. Beneath each figure, the soil carried a faint echo when struck, like the skin of a drum stretched tight over something hollow. By noon, they had uncovered the torsos of 6 soldiers. Their armor gleamed faintly, veins of quartz tracing through the stone as though life still pulsed within. The scanners confirmed an anomaly. Each figure extended far below the surface, fused to the bedrock itself. There were no seams, no joints, no signs of sculpting. It was as if these men had grown from the earth. When the sun reached its peak, the first vibration came, subtle, deep, and measured. The ground trembled, not as from a quake, but as though something beneath it had drawn a long, patient breath. The instruments picked it up, translating it into a pulse that repeated every 9 seconds. The men stood frozen, eyes shifting toward the horizon. The commander wrote in his logbook that the air had changed texture. It felt thicker, charged, like walking through someone's memory, he wrote. That night, no one spoke loudly. The desert, it seemed, had started to listen back. By the second day, the scientists noticed something strange about the surfaces of the figures. Beneath layers of dust, microscopic ridges traced across the armor. Not cracks, not erosion, but deliberate etchings. Under infrared light, the lines revealed an intricate lattice of symbols, spiraling around each statue's body, converging at the chest. The markings glowed faintly when exposed to certain wavelengths, as though responding to light itself. One linguist from Tehran squinted at the patterns for hours before muttering, "It's not writing, it's resonance." The curves weren't designed to be read, they were meant to be heard. When they played soft tonal frequencies through a speaker near the stone, the ridges vibrated back in perfect harmony, releasing faint dust from the cracks. The frequency wasn't random. It matched human breath at rest, 12 beats per minute. At dusk, as the team prepared to close for the day, one researcher stood near the central figure and whispered a phrase in Persian, a simple invocation of greeting. For a heartbeat, the hum changed pitch, rising slightly, almost like acknowledgement. The others laughed it off, but when they reviewed the recording later, the microphone had captured a soft undertone that hadn't been present before, a tone too low for the human ear, but perfectly steady. The linguist wrote in his journal that night, "They're not silent, they're waiting for the right sound." On the 5th morning, the drills broke through a layer of compacted quartz beneath the central statue. The sound it made wasn't the brittle crack of rock, but the hollow ring of metal struck under tension. The dust cleared to reveal a smooth surface carved into a perfect circle, its edge lined with geometric grooves, a hatch, or something older than that word could mean. When they lowered a small camera through the gap, the feed flickered once and went black. The generator failed a moment later. The desert fell silent again, heavier than before. As they waited for the power to return, one of the younger workers leaned close to the opening. From the darkness below came a rhythm, not sound but vibration, slow, deliberate, and impossibly deep. It pulsed once every few seconds, echoing through the soles of their boots. By dusk, the hatch had sealed itself. The stone that had split now showed no mark of fracture. Every attempt to locate the gap failed. The coordinates themselves seemed to shift by degrees each time they checked. Instruments malfunctioned. Memory itself felt unreliable. In the logbook that night, the commander wrote only one line: "We have found the heart of something that remembers being alive." When the sun rose, it did so without warmth. Light stretched across the valley like a slow exhale, touching every ridge, every grain of sand, but giving nothing back. The statues stood in perfect stillness, their armor dulled, their faces turned toward the east. Around their feet, the sand had settled in strange symmetrical mounds, as though shaped by unseen hands. The team moved carefully, measuring, documenting, whispering. None of them could explain what had happened in the night, yet every man felt it, the weight of presence, the echo of something vast and patient. The air was cleaner, almost new, stripped of the hum that had filled it for days. When the linguist replayed the recordings, he found nothing. Every tape, every frequency sample, every log, blank, not erased, but silent, as if sound itself had refused to exist. He looked out over the ridge and said quietly, "They've gone back to sleep." The commander didn't answer. He stood beside the nearest statue, hand resting on the stone that felt faintly warm, like breath still lingering beneath the surface. That afternoon, the desert wind returned for the first time in days. It carried no voice this time, no resonance, just a dry sigh that moved through the valley like a closing prayer. 3 nights later, the team prepared to leave. Equipment was packed, tents collapsed, coordinates logged. Only the commander remained awake. sitting alone beside the transmitter. The radio had been dead since the storm, until now. At exactly 02:47 hours, the receiver hissed. Static flickered, faint and rhythmic. The commander leaned closer, eyes fixed on the dial. A voice emerged, fragile but distinct, speaking in a language no one had recorded before. The cadence was military, clipped, ordered, but the words carried an echo that didn't belong to this time. Then, through the static, came a clear line in Persian. "We remember our watch." The transmission ended with a soft click, leaving only silence and the hum of the desert wind. The commander exhaled, switched off the radio, and wrote his final entry. "If they still stand, then we still listen." At dawn, the transmitter failed permanently. The power cells were found fused, their surfaces rippled like cooled glass. The last helicopter rose from the plateau in a storm of dust. From above, the valley looked unchanged, pale, endless, unmoving. But the formation of the statues had shifted once more. The aerial photos, taken moments before departure, showed them standing in a new alignment, not toward the east this time, but inward, facing the valley's center, as if to guard it. Weeks later, satellite imaging showed only dunes. No stone, no outline, no trace of human or monument. The desert had reclaimed everything. In the years that followed, no expedition returned. The official record listed the site as geologically unstable, unsafe for study. Yet every now and then, travelers crossing that part of the Persian plateau report a sound carried on the evening wind. Not a hum, not a chant, just the faint rhythmic cadence of boots moving through sand. Some say it's the echo of old soldiers. Others say it's the earth remembering what it once protected. And on certain nights, when the sky is clear and the wind stills, the valley shines faintly under the moon, as though thousands stand there again, waiting for dawn that never comes. The silence that remained was not emptiness. It was rest. Night returned like a tide, soft and relentless. The camp rested under thin moonlight, the air carrying the faint taste of iron. No one spoke of the hatch, yet no one slept. Every so often, a tremor passed through the sand, barely enough to register, yet unmistakably rhythmic. It wasn't random, it had cadence, a slow heartbeat beneath the earth. Around midnight, the seismograph began tracing perfect intervals. The operator stared at the pattern, his eyes following the repetition. Rise, pause, fall, silence. He whispered, "It's breathing." The commander dismissed him with a look, but his hand trembled as he wrote the coordinates. Outside, the statues glowed faintly where the moonlight touched them. For a moment, one of the men swore he saw dust lift from a soldier's eyelid, as though stirred by breath. By dawn, the air had changed again, heavier, charged, and strangely warm. The wind circled the camp but never entered. It moved in loops, like something pacing. When the light finally broke, it revealed something new. A fresh line of footprints between the statues, shallow but defined, leading toward the ridge. They ended abruptly where the sand turned to stone. No one could explain how they'd formed in the night, nor whose boots had left them. The commander ordered silence in the report. "It's a geological illusion," he said aloud. But in his private log, he wrote one line. "The desert has begun to move in its sleep." By afternoon, they decided to test the ground near the central ridge with low-frequency sound waves. The generator emitted a hum deep enough to vibrate through bone, and the valley answered. Dust rose from the surface like mist disturbed from a still pond. It moved in circles around the statues, forming narrow spirals before collapsing again. The linguist adjusted the frequency, matching it to the rhythm they'd recorded from the subsoil. For a moment, everything fell perfectly silent. Then, without warning, the statues began to resonate. A faint ring filled the air, clear, metallic, harmonic. Not loud, but impossibly vast, as though every grain of sand were part of the same instrument. One soldier shouted that he heard voices. Another said it was singing. The recordings caught both, layered faintly beneath the vibration, tones that resembled human syllables, but carried no language known to any living tongue. When the sound stopped, the entire team stood still, afraid to move or speak. Their shadows stretched long across the ground, each one perfectly aligned to the next. The commander switched off the generator. The valley inhaled once and fell silent again. Hours later, one of the technicians reviewed the waveform data. The harmonic pattern repeated 7 times before cutting off. each wave identical to the rhythm of a heartbeat. Not human, the report said, but deliberate. That night, the wind didn't come from the east as it always did. It came from below. The sand shifted upward, flowing against gravity, forming thin veils that shimmered in moonlight. Every grain seemed to carry light of its own. The men gathered outside their tents, their faces pale in the glow. The statues stood as they always had, silent, still, eternal. But the air around them bent slightly as though warped by heat. And then, for one impossible second, the nearest figure seemed to exhale. A puff of dust escaped its lips and hung there, glowing faintly before dispersing. No one screamed. No one ran. It was too quiet, too sacred, too vast to feel like danger. The commander stepped closer, and the sand beneath his boots pulsed once, soft as breath against the skin. By morning, the dunes had shifted entirely. The footprints from the day before were gone. The statues now faced slightly east, their formation altered by degrees, as though they had taken one silent step in the night. The report from that morning contained only 4 words. Orientation changed, no witnesses, and beneath it, a handwritten note. They remember the march. The following evening arrived heavier than the last. The light dimmed faster, the air thick with anticipation. Not fear, something quieter, more watchful. As the horizon bled into copper dusk, a soft tremor brushed through the valley, subtle enough to be mistaken for wind. But the instruments showed no movement. The air was perfectly still. Then came the sound, not a hum this time. A voice, distant yet close, like a whisper spoken through fabric. It wasn't words, it was cadence, slow and deliberate, the same rhythm the statues had carried since discovery. The men froze where they stood. Even the radio operator, whose headphones hissed with static, heard it through the noise. A voice not over the airwaves, but inside them. The linguist replayed earlier recordings, comparing frequencies. The whisper's pattern matched the harmonic waves from the previous night. Each tone aligned perfectly with the etched symbols on the statues. It wasn't random. It was language, ancient, tonal, measured like breath. The commander ordered radio silence, but no command carried weight anymore. The sound was everywhere, in the sand, in their chests, in the hollow between thoughts. It rose and fell like a tide without water. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. In the stillness that followed, the temperature dropped sharply. The air tasted like stone ground into dust. Somewhere in the darkness, one of the statues leaned. Not visibly, but enough that everyone felt it. The earth gave a sigh, long and deep. And in the camp's floodlights, faint shadows began to move across the dunes, not cast by the men, but toward them. The shadows came without sound. They drifted like smoke, but moved with purpose, falling into the same formation as the statues. The men watched in disbelief as the outlines of soldiers, transparent, now shimmering, arranged themselves in rows, helmets, rifles, uniforms made of dust and light. The radio crackled to life again, though no one had touched it. A faint transmission hummed through the static. Short, clipped syllables in Persian, then a sudden shift to another tongue, older, sharper. The linguist caught fragments that translated roughly to, "We remain." "We march." The ground pulsed in rhythm with the voices. Every vibration pressed deeper into the body, like a memory resurfacing through bone. The men could barely stand. The weight of the air itself seemed to anchor them. Then, one by one, the statues began to move, not fluidly, not like flesh, but slowly, grindingly, as though gravity itself had to remember how to yield. Sand cascaded from their joints, revealing glimpses of dull bronze beneath the stone skin. The first step each took left a hollow sound that resonated across the valley like the strike of a distant drum. No one spoke. No one fled. There was awe instead of panic, a reverence for the impossible. It felt less like witnessing resurrection and more like seeing the earth complete an unfinished thought. Midnight came without stars. The sky turned black as ink, and the only light came from the faint glowing outlines of the moving figures. The soldiers, of stone, of shadow, now stood at the valley's edge, facing east. A soft chant filled the air, wordless and deep. It came not from mouths, but from the ground itself, the vibration of something remembering how to exist. each tone aligned with the ancient carvings across their armor, making them shimmer faintly like heat waves on metal. The commander stepped forward. His voice trembled when he spoke. "If they're marching," he whispered, "where are they going?" No one answered. The statues stood still again, their motion complete. The valley fell silent. At dawn, every trace of the movement was gone. The sand lay smooth, unbroken. The statues had returned to stillness, facing the sunrise. Only one change remained. Each face now bore a thin trail down its cheek, as if from melting stone or something older than tears. In his final log, the commander wrote, "They were not cursed. They were unfinished,